You're listening to the Nerdverse Adventures podcast. I'm your host, Anton, and coming up, my dear friend Lenira joins the show to discuss the Harry Potter reunion special. Lenira is someone I met kind of in my adult life, in my mid-20s, but we immediately connected over everything nerdy, from Harry Potter to anime to video games, and I thought it was a very special connection that her and I were able to connect so freely, so quickly, at a point in my life that I thought, I wasn't so sure if I had space for nerdy friends anymore. What turns out, it really just depends on who enters your life at what point in your life, and kind of this idea of destiny leading you to a point of choice. And that choice was to grow this friendship with Lenira. So when the Harry Potter reunion special was announced, she was the first person I thought of. Just with everything I know about how she experiences stories, how she speed read through all of the Harry Potter books later in life, but did so in a way where she comprehended and took in every single one of the magical elements and lessons to such a degree that resonated with me in the way that she talked about Harry Potter. So I'm incredibly grateful and excited for her to join the show, for you all to hear the insights and the illumination she brings to the world, the wizarding world of Harry Potter. And let's get into it. Coming up, the Harry Potter reunion special and our Harry Potter origins with Lenira on the Nerdverse Adventures. Welcoming to the Nerdverse Adventures podcast, my dear friend, someone who I've bonded with over a many number of fantasy and science fiction things, books, stories, movies, TV shows, an enormous nerd, a giant nerd, the one and only Lenira. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, dude. When the Harry Potter reunion special was announced, I was just very excited to see what the cast and crew were going to look like. 20 years later, essentially adults now, like we grew up with them. And it got me to reflect on meeting people throughout my life and bonding over various interests, whether that's nerdy stuff, whether that's books and stories and Harry Potter. And you came to mind because you and I met in our adult lives. But I do feel like the moment that we met and started talking about video games and comic books and anime, we immediately bonded in a way that I didn't think I could bond with another adult the same way at that point. And then when you told me about Harry Potter, I was like, oh, this is perfect. So I wanted to have you on to kind of discuss Harry Potter, but also to kind of go over your origin story with the books, the movies, the characters, the world, the wizarding world. So let's start there. Lenira, tell me about your origin story with Harry Potter, when you discovered stories, and what was that like finding them at that point in your life?
Yeah, I actually vividly remember the first time I saw Harry Potter. It was when the movie came out. It was 2001, and I was 9 years old at that time. And it was out of sheer coincidence that I watched the movie, like just random, because I went to the movie theater with my mom, and at that time, I didn't really know how to pick movies, and I haven't really been to a movie theater frequently. I mostly watch cartoons, and my mom just found the poster of Harry Potter at the front. And because it looked age appropriate, since there was children on the poster, that's the one she picked without having any knowledge what Harry Potter was, or even the book series, how famous it was at that time. So it was just by sheer random luck that I discovered it with my mom for the first time in the movie theater when the very first movie came out.
Yeah, I feel like that story is so instructive of how we stumble on to these fantasy worlds, right? Where, as kids, we don't really have direction. We don't really know how to go about finding these places of imagination. Like, we all have them inside of us, but we just need a way to kind of express them. We need a little bit of guidance. And it's just really fun and serendipitous that you found it through essentially a poster at the movie theater randomly during a time before you could buy tickets ahead of time, where you just had to go to the theater and buy it at the box office. So take me through it. So you saw the movie in theaters without any prior knowledge of anything in the wizarding world, anything about Harry Potter. What was that like coming out of the theater? And then what did you do afterwards to kind of explore more about the stories?
Yeah, to be totally transparent, the first time that I saw the movie, I didn't have very strong feelings, like a strong attachment to that movie. It was honestly around the time where it was associated with a bad luck event that happened subsequent to the movie. So what happened was it was rainy and my mom left her light on and my dad had to pick us up. So we were waiting in the rain after the Harry Potter movie. And that was the part that I remembered the most about that experience. But when I was watching the movie, what I recalled the most was that the characters in the movies were in the movie was around the same age as me. I think they were 11 at that time and I was 9, so 2 years older than me. And the magic aspect, I was so fascinated with all the magical abilities that they showcased in the movie. And the scene that I vividly remembered the most was the very last scene with Voldemort's face on the back of Professor Quirrell's head, because as a 9-year-old, that was frankly just frightening. So I didn't really have huge takeaways from the movie. I didn't remember the plot. I don't know who the actors or actresses were. And I think I would say like it wasn't a negative experience, but it was kind of a neutral experience. Like I remembered certain pieces about it, but I didn't have strong feelings towards it at that time.
You bring up the last scene and how vividly that sense of evil and fear was, right? I think that's kind of the beauty of a lot of Harry Potter, where initially it's a kid's story, right? Yeah. It's your introduction into a larger world, but from the point of view where you're a bit naive, when you're not really paying attention to every single detail, you just want to experience it without really hanging up on a lot of things until you catch that emotional moment, whether it's frightening, whether it's wonderful. And that's actually pretty cool that you remember it. How did that kind of snowball into further discovery and desire to wanting to know more about Harry Potter?
Yeah, so at that time, I was attending a Christian school. And I was really close to my god family at that time. So the accessibility wasn't there. We had a library at my Christian school and Harry Potter was not on the shelf. So I know the book came before the film and I had no access to that at all. So I remember this first time I saw the Harry Potter book. The very first book, The Sorcerer's Stone, was actually at my god family's home. And remember I said they're super religious. I was going to ask to borrow it. However, as soon as my godmother saw, she told me that she had confiscated that book before and she doesn't know why it's on the shelf. And I was like really confused and flustered at that time because I went to the movies with my mom and watched the movie together and I just wanted to read the book. But she said the book had evil teachings in it. At that time, I was really young, so I also didn't really understand what she meant by evil teachings. But I think at that time at my life, I was super obedient towards authoritative figures. So I never asked again. I never asked to borrow that book again. So I looked it up after, I don't know at what point I looked it up, but I just like accepted it and I didn't question it further at that point in my life. But later I looked it up why it was considered evil in Christianity. It's because there's like Wicca and satanic elements in the book. For example, drinking animal blood or sacrificing a human to gain eternal life or contacting the dead. Like in the very first scene, when they first arrive at Hogwarts, there's ghosts and they're talking to the ghosts. So they're considered satanic and Wicca elements in Christianity.
I think it's incredibly fascinating that you had that experience with so much conflict with religion, with Christianity, with Harry Potter, because I think it's also kind of instructive within the story itself, where ultimately Harry Potter ends with this tale of suppression of agency, right? You have Voldemort and the Death Eaters essentially wanting the world to be their way only. And that's kind of interesting that that's a very, real world parallel in how those books were received at that time. I think the books are far more lightly received now, but I do also remember that being a talking point for a lot of kids my age, right? Where they would hear something from either a parent who was very religious about how the books were frowned upon. But luckily, I was able to kind of experience them firsthand. And for me, my first introduction of Harry Potter was in 7th grade. So I was born in 1987. I think I'm almost the exact same age as all the actors. So I have grown up in parallel, mirroring the stories, the books, and also the real people who played them. And I do remember a lot of that conflict of trying to figure out what books were right for me, how they were right for me, but I didn't have that much guidance from adults as well. I think in your case, the kind of guidance you had was to kind of stray away from very specific things. Mine was I didn't have any support system to kind of figure it out, so I was lost in the woods. And I'm the kind of person that kind of needs structure. So I somehow found Harry Potter in 7th grade. I think kids were reading it at the time, and my grandma had bought the first book for me. I remember specifically at Costco because they had enormous stacks of books in the middle of the warehouse. And then I got it for Christmas and I fell in love with the world. At that point, I was not a very good reader. I distinctly remember in 5th grade turning in book reports late because I would read books way ahead of my reading level. But I was curious. I wanted to know. I'd still get bad grades on them, but I would still want to read. So much so that I was eventually kind of discouraged from that. But thankfully, Harry Potter came into my life. And even though I had trouble, with the literature a bit, it was still a nice way to kind of practice and learn how to read and open up that world for me. So yeah, I am forever grateful for, kind of growing up in parallel with these stories, shaping and kind of molding, my interest and love for reading, fantasy storytelling, and kind of the greater world of, imagination and creativity. And I feel like that's what this reunion special was all about, right? It was about bringing the original cast back 20 years later. They're all adults. And then some of the older cast members are, grandpas and grandmas. And it's really reflecting back at the physical locations of how it all began. The reunion special, did feel like a conversation between all the cast members and directors. What were your big picture takeaways from it all, kind of experiencing it again after so many years?
Honestly, the first thought when I saw the reunion special, the very, very first thought, it made me sad because the cast aged so much in these years in a good and in just like a natural process of life kind of way. And it made me nostalgic of the times where earlier you mentioned you grew up alongside them, and I felt like I grew up alongside them as well. So it was pretty emotional seeing them in a different stage of their life than when they first started filming in the very first film.
Yeah, I think it's, I hate to use it, but I think I'm probably going to say it like several times throughout the show. Mm-hmm. It's a magical experience to really come back to see where they are today. Like you said, they've aged very clearly. I think they made a joke at one point in the special that they look better than the epilogue of the Deathly Hallows, which yeah, for sure. Ron not in a fat suit. Okay. I think you take that as a win. But I think it's just fascinating to see them all kind of reflect, and be very grateful just to be in each other's lives still. Even though it's brought together by this reunion special, being back in the world where there's a set and setting to this type of conversation is pretty spectacular. So I do appreciate just coming back to the world. The structure of the special was interesting. It was done in chapters, 4 chapters total, going over each of the movies in specific eras, right? And kind of what they represented. So let's kind of jump into the special and go chapter by chapter. What was it all about? And kind of reflect on each of those stories, as we go through. So chapter 1 starts, it's The Boy Who Lived, and it's the Philosopher's Stone, the Sorcerer's Stone for us in the United States, and the Chamber of Secrets. And it's this beginning to the journey, entering the world of magic. All the kids are 11 years old, I believe, in the movie, and they show a lot of the casting background footage, but also how the world was created. What were your takeaways? How did you feel about seeing a lot of the behind the scenes? And like you said, you related to those characters because you essentially saw yourself in them. Was it kind of a nostalgia trip for you to kind of put yourself back into that world at that time in your own life?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that I remembered was when they talked about the setting. The point that is still more vivid in my memory is when they talked about how the details they put into the set, which I had no idea at that time. Like right now, I think a lot of our films are mostly CGI, but back then the CGI did not have the capabilities we have today. So they were mentioning that they had actual candles strung up on fishing lines, and because they use real candles, it's like burning. It's like burning the rope and it's falling down. So like totally real life details. Um, I always appreciated the work that went into the series, but it was so cool when they started talking about the behind the scenes sets that I developed a more appreciation for after they talked about it. And it was nostalgic when they started talking about their memory of the very first film because I felt like I entered that magical world in parallel. They were discovering Hogwarts. They were going to Hogwarts for the first time and starting their journey. And in parallel, I was discovering this world of magic that I never had exposure to, especially because I didn't have accessibility due to my background.
So, that brings to mind Hermione's story, right? Where
Yeah.
she is a Muggle, but she comes to a world of magic on her own free will, on her own fruition, right? Fruition, one of those. And how did you connect with that character? I know that character is very important to a lot of young women growing up and coming of age at that period in their life, and even still to this day. What was your connection with Hermione Granger?
So I think at that time, a lot of cartoons that I watched prior to watching Harry Potter were strong male leads. And the side characters are always like a damsel in distress character. And it didn't really, I mean, it resonated with me because I was on the Shire side. So I felt like at that point of my life, I felt more connected to that character. But Hermione was who I aspired to be, especially with my Asian cultural background. Like, it's important to be intelligent, but she was also vocal and she was strong in her opinions. Um, so I guess I didn't connect with her in a way that I was hoping to. Like, I didn't feel like I was her, but I wanted to become her.
No, that's an amazing connection, right? Because I do feel like she is one of the first, of the era of kind of the shifting perspective of what it
Yeah.
means to have a female lead in any storytelling, whether that's movies, TV shows, and books, anything accessible, anything to get people to engage, right? And it really opened up what it meant to explore those types of themes and lessons that a different point of view are going to experience. Because I think primarily we've all grown up with the male protagonist being the focal point, and it's his hero's journey that we're following. Where ultimately, at the end of this story, I do think it's the story of these three very different heroes, but they all love each other. They are all family. They are brothers and sisters, both of them. Both of them too, Hermione. For me, kind of going back and seeing how their chemistry was built through all the screen tests was in. I don't really have the emotional words to put into it as far as other than it gave me chills, because it's one of those like time capsule moments where you see them as 11-year-olds. And then for me, it's like, where was I at that point in my life? Oh, I was also 11, 12 years old. And I could not imagine being that dough-faced kid trying to figure out how to interact with another human being. But they did so effortlessly, where it was such a natural connection and communication. What did you see in those scenes when they were kids, meeting for the first time?
Yeah, I still remember they showed a clip of their first, I guess, is it screen reading? I don't know the correct terminology for it. But it was all three of them reading from the script, and you can see the chemistry right away. And I think Christopher mentioned that it just clicked right away. He just knew from the instance they did the live test together. And I also remember him saying that they are their characters. And I know it's mentioned later in the reunion series, it's not in chapter 1, but they are really their characters. And the specific example I remembered is when the second director in the second chapter asked them to do homework, and Ron did not write an essay because Rupert, I even used his character name. Rupert didn't write an essay because he didn't believe would. So I thought that was perfect. They really, really are their characters.
Yeah, no, that's a beautiful point. And we could jump to it a little bit. In chapter 2, they were given an assignment by Alfonso Cuarón. He directed The Prisoner of Azkaban because he wanted to get into the mind of the characters. So he told them to all write essays. Emma Watson, Hermione, wrote a 12-page paper. I think Dan wasn't specific, but I think he did say he had an idea of what to do, so he submitted something. But then Rupert specifically, very casually, just said, I just didn't do it. And in that moment, I was like, yes, these characters, these people are their characters. And it was just a fascinating character study of kind of the back and forth and what it meant to live in the skin of Harry Potter, Hermione Granger, and Ron Weasley for over 10 years of your life. And it kind of shows that it's not necessarily they lived in their skin so much as they were just themselves. And I think for me, reflecting on it today, it kind of gave me solace. It gave me a lot of comfort to think that I could just kind of be myself, and I will let that be enough to be the main character of a story. I think that was very powerful for me to kind of see that play out in present day. One of the other characters I do want to touch on for chapter 1 that I think was also very fascinating was Meet the Malfoys was the section. And it was kind of the start of uncovering this onion of what the Malfoys were, right? And they showed the actor who played Lucius Malfoy. He's very charming. And I was so enamored by the way he spoke about acting and the study behind it. But then when he got into Lucius's skin, you can see the evil, almost gritted teeth, kind of intensity he had, and how Draco played into it. You can kind of see that yes, they're acting, but they did an excellent job bringing those characters to life. What did you think about that interaction between Draco and Lucius from the first few films?
Yeah, it was kind of similar to how I felt about the Voldemort scene. So honestly, when I was 9, when I watched it, I don't think it really clicked with me, that scene where Lucius and Malfoy interacted. But later, I think when I rewatched it, I felt similar chills. And I think that one was more scary because I could see that happening in real life. That there are parents and families that are cold, distant, and powerful, and borderline cruel to their kids. So it was a little bit frightening and jarring to see that on the screen.
I love that sense of realism, right? Where we're in a fantastical world of magic, but the fundamental nature of how people act and behave and grow together and learn about the world is all still the same, which I think makes it very real for you and I and the millions of people who have experienced these stories, right? And I think that's something that I attach to when I'm trying to transport and project myself into a world of magic. And I think Chris Columbus. I always want to say Christopher Columbus. I know it's not, but he directed the first 2 films, and he did a wonderful job of bringing it through a childlike lens, a childlike perspective, right? I think we talked a lot about kind of the story and how it's very much from this starting point of being a kid, being 11 and 12. But then in chapter 2, he hands it off to 2 other directors. The first director, I love this guy. He did The Revenant. And he did, the movie escapes me. It's the one with Sandra Bullock in space. I apologize.
Did you spell it?
No, it's the one where she's in space and then her ship explodes. George Clooney dies at the beginning of it.
Oh my gosh, I don't really know that.
My God, I should have written this down. Anyways, he did that movie. He himself is a very artistic auteur type director. He takes control of all of the emotional aspects and gives it a deeper, more lived in experience. And that is exactly how I felt about The Prisoner of Azkaban. That is unapologetically my favorite story of Harry Potter, but probably of so many other fantasy stories I've ever read. As you can see, I have a copy of it behind me. I love the fact that it is growing up, but not too far, right? Like you're still feeling the excitement of being a kid, but now you're feeling the pressures and fear of what it means for the real world kind of pressing down on you. How did you what did you think about them kind of talking about the Dementors, and then Gary Oldman, Sirius Black being introduced into the series?
Yeah, so like you said and you mentioned, it's not quite childhood anymore and it's not quite adulthood, but it's this threshold between childhood and adolescence. So I think that film was perfect for that since there are darker elements like the Dementors. I think the Dementors, it was the same feeling when I saw Lucius Malfoy as well as Voldemort in the back of Professor Quirrell's head. It was chilling, but it was more chilling because they explained that the Dementors were literally sucking the joy out of someone's life. And that was really, really frightening. In contrast, I found the scene with Sirius Black really heartwarming. In the reunion, I think Harry Potter was talking, actually, I think it was Alfonso actually talking about the bond between Harry and Sirius in the film, but as well as their actual actors, like bonding in real life. So that was really heartwarming to see. So it's such a contrast. Here's this like blooming's not the right word, but this like close-knit relationship, but at the same time there's like something scary and real happening in their world, in the magical world. And I think it parallels, I think we keep talking about the same things, but it parallels around the time as a preteen where it's like not quite childhood, but they're still like developing relationships that we're trying to figure out. But it's getting to real life. We're kind of like pushing ourselves and learning about the realities, which frankly is not always good. It's kind of dark sometimes.
It's this idea of having questions as you're going into your teenage years, right? Mm-hmm. And slowly starting to see the world not exactly how it's been told to us. Going beyond the surface. Definitely mirroring the story of Sirius Black, where at the very beginning of the story, between the books and the movies, you are made to believe that he is the worst person in Harry Potter's life. He was the reason why Voldemort killed his parents. Mm-hmm. Only for it to be unraveled slowly into a story of being a protector, being the guy who does want to take care of Harry Potter more than anyone, because he was the best friend that was framed for it. All leading into the scene at the Weeping Willow. I think Alfonso Cuarón did an excellent job framing that interaction between all of the actors. I get chills kind of thinking about it because I just love the way that they dissected not only Ron, Harry, and Hermione's presence and place in it, but also them as actors, as learning from all the masters of acting. I think it's I have Gary Oldman, David Thewlis, Alan Rickman, and Timothy Spall. These are all like royalty in UK British acting, right? And the way he describes the scene, that there's a lot of twist, push, pull, conflict, and complexity, right? And I, as a kid, you don't catch these details. You just experience it as this very tense moment. As an adult, I kind of reflect on thinking the layers of what it means to experience conflict, and the fact that, like sometimes things aren't as black and white or as simple to understand. And I think they did an excellent job of creating that tension. What did you think about that scene and how they talked about it in the special?
Yeah, honestly, that scene happened. I still remember because they were at the Shrieking Shack, right?
Oh,
yeah, they were at the Shrieking Shack. Sorry, and I remember watching that scene. I do remember that scene, but it happened so quickly. And like they said in the reunion special, and like what you just mentioned, there was so many twists and turns. I don't think I understood all the layers. And honestly, to this day, I don't know if I understand all the layers because there was so much going on in that scene. There's a lot of characters in that scene. There was a lot of confusion like they're confused at each other, they're confused at what's happening, and that confusion is translating to real life too, because now I'm not sure what's happening. So I did have to rewatch it a couple of times, but as they were explaining the details and the thought behind it, I was really impressed at all the details that they had to think about. It was complex filming, I'm sure, because there were so many like angles of the camera, and they had to carefully capture each emotion, and I think every single actor and actress delivered. Well, yeah. I guess just one actress.
No, but I echo everything that you said there, because again, not being you're a kid, so you obviously don't have the experience with storytelling, with filmmaking, so you don't really understand exactly how it all came together, but you have a visceral feeling of the tension, of the stress of the moment, and you all, and at least me personally, I all relate it back to the perspective of Ron, Harry, and Hermione, right, where they are just confused, and we know eventually it's a turning point in their story, in their lives. We don't know how yet. And I think that's just very indicative of real life, right? Where we just have these amazing inflection points throughout life. We don't know how it's going to turn out. We don't know why they're happening. But in the moment, sometimes it's just really intense and it sticks with you. And I think that was probably one of the most memorable moments of the entire series, from one of my favorite books. Shout out to the Time Turner. That was probably one of my first experiences of time travel where I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like, I love time travel. Yeah, and I think I was, when did that come out? Maybe I was 14, 15 at that point. Yeah, just, it's so many memories. So Alfonso does number 3. And then we have a new director, Mike Newell. He takes over for The Goblet of Fire, the Triwizard Tournament. The way that it's framed in the special, it's a grand new era. Lenira, I'm going to throw it to you. What did you think about this big spectacle movie? Also considering that the book is enormous. It's almost 1,000 pages, and I think it's the longest book in the series. How did you take in the entire experience?
This was my favorite book and my favorite movie. And the reason why is I found the characters to be really relatable at that time in my life. So I was 14, I think, or I was a preteen when that one came out. And the scene with the dancing, the Yule Ball, asking your crushes out, I found that really relatable. It was hormones, awkward crushes, feelings, everything. And I think they did talk about that at the reunion series too, because they were going through the same stages of their life as their character is going through. So I felt like we're all going through the same thing. It was my favorite. I found that to be the most relatable movie for me.
I think there was a very pointed moment in the special where they could reflect on seeing Hermione in her dress.
Yes.
It's not, what did they say? It's, they don't see her they no longer see her as just a sidekick. They see her as a young woman. How did that hit you? You know, hearing that from them present day.
Yeah, so honestly, because I'm a little bit younger than the characters, I was hoping for a glow up just the same as Emma Watson had in the film. It just didn't happen at that age. But it was seeing her in a different light, because I still, like, when I think of Hermione, I still think of her in her fluffy hair, and it was her teetering between a child and a woman now, which was such an awkward phase. And I think they transitioned it really abruptly in the movie when she just wore a dress and she came down the stairs. And I guess it mirrors real life, because there's just some point where you become an adult and it doesn't really feel like that. Yeah, I still really vividly remember that scene. She's coming down the staircase and she's in dress. All the guys are looking at her. She looked gorgeous.
Yeah, no, I think what you said about that being so similar to real life really hits home for me, because oftentimes we like to think that, life is a progression, right? You kind of go through life and grow little by little, day by day, but you don't take in every single moment all the time. You know, we'd love to be present, but at the same time, life gets in the way, things get in the way, action, adventure, or kind of just going about your day, takes your attention. And it's not until you look up and something has drastically changed, whether that's a specific occurrence or an event, in this case, the Yule Ball, that you get this moment of transformation and you get this moment of self-reflection. I think it's very important for young people to see that you will change and you don't have to notice every single little change, but eventually you will change for the better as long as you keep doing what it is that you feel like is right. And I feel like that's such a Hermione trajectory.
And also I wanted to point out in the reunion special was like they were cutting to the scene where she had the glow up, and then they were cutting to a scene where she was talking about her crush openly. She had a crush on Tom Felton. And I felt like it was such a contrast to what they showed on screen. Like she was unsure of herself, not confident. I know she had feelings for Ron at that time, but she wasn't able to admit her feelings. And here she is like 10 years later, and she's publicly admitting her crush on Tom Felton. So it's so amazing to see her grow. And we didn't see the in-between parts of her journey, but we did see the before and after transformation.
That was an incredibly heartwarming moment for both of those people, right? Those real people, right? And I do think, like you said, it is a contrast because it shows what happens 20 years later, right? 20 years later from the first movie, that you are able as an adult to kind of reflect and say, yes, this is what actually happened. Because in the moment, hormones are taking over. You don't really know, you're confused. But I love the way that they cut back and forth to all the little snippets of them and then them narrating over like, yes, I was looking for his number on the call sheet and it was going to be a wonderful day if I saw him. Or what did he say? He said he drew a picture of God for an assignment and said it was Emma. If that doesn't work, I don't know what does. That's kind of genius. Good on him. But ultimately, at the end of the day, because they were just so unsure of themselves, they were kids. They were so uncertain. They didn't really know how to figure out love and romance. They did know that they loved each other, but it became a platonic love, but a very strong, soft spot type of platonic love that they still carry till this day. So I thought that was pretty special of them to reflect back on it. All this love and romance and kind of good feelings and celebration was very much contrasted with the end of the movie. And I thought it was fascinating how they talked about it. Kind of jumping to what the director said, throughout the movie, you get a sense of big, bombastic celebration, but the movie ultimately isn't about life. It's about death. How did that hit you? Hearing it today, hearing it reflected by the creators, and then ultimately how the stories played out between the books and the movie.
Sorry, I missed that. It isn't about death, it's about life. Is that right?
It isn't about death, it's about life. I think that's the line. Okay. Did I mess that up? I might have messed that up.
To be honest, I didn't think about that death that much at that age. I think I was just being fearful. I was just so scared at the thought of death, honestly. I think that carried over even into my later years. Like, I didn't understand it, so I was scared of it. And I think the fear of death made me not stop living, but it made me not live life to the fullest, because it was always on the back of my mind. Not chronically, but a lot of the times it would like invade my mind a lot of the times. And I think that quote resonates with me more now. It's not about the end, but it's about the journey of getting there, like what I'm going to do in between. But this is a more recent discovery. Like when I was younger, I think I was more results driven. And if death was the end, like what's the point, right? And that was a hard thought for me to reconcile at that age.
Yeah, no, I think you said some really powerful things there. And I think it comes with this entire theme of coming of age for these two movies. Because, if we're looking at it from a neuroscientific point of view, that is the point of life where we are slowly moving past rigid and fixed thinking and moving into more fluid, dynamic growth mindset type of ideas. And having death be the end is a very fixed idea. And it's a very objective idea, right? But it's not until we get older, it's not until we come to grips with that in our own lives that we're kind of able to reflect and be more flexible with everything that comes before that moment. They did mention in the special, the director, he said, the children have left childhood and have to confront the perils of adulthood, and it all comes from that moment of death. I think that was a great encapsulation of what that story meant, because it's about kids celebrating being kids until they have to grow up. And the rest of the series is them wrestling with that push and pull of being adults. Let's move into chapter 3. So we've got the light and the dark within, the Order of the Phoenix, and the Half-Blood Prince. I remember taking a break from Harry Potter at this point in my life. So I didn't read them in parallel with the movies. I think I actually took a break from the movies as well. I didn't get back to the movies until maybe a few years later. I think it was until the Deathly Hallows Part 2 that I re-entered the world of Harry Potter. What was it like for you to read the books, watch the movies? Because I think you were probably more in parallel than I was. And then hearing how they reflected at this stage in their lives. Shout out to Helena Bonham Carter, because I think she was kind of the star of this segment. But she did bring a bit of levity in an otherwise dark moment for Harry Potter. How did you feel about how it all played out on the special?
I do want to say that I watched all the movies first before I read the books. So I read the books much later in my life. So when I saw the first movie, The Order of the Phoenix, actually both the movies, these two films were more challenging for me to watch. It was political and dark, and in contrast to The Goblet of Fire, I didn't really relate to these characters at that time. They were standing up to authority figures, and I just, in that state of that period of time, I would not do that. I mean, I would talk back to my parents like a normal teenager or preteen, but I would not stand up against authority figures outside of that. So I didn't find the characters that relatable, and it was really frustrating for me because I don't think I would have made the same decisions that the main trio made at that point.
No, that's an excellent point, because I do think it's very much based in, you know, your own personal histories, right? I think for you and I, we're very similar in that we grew up in Eastern centric type of cultures. You know, we are Asian American, but we do have a different set of just inherent values, right? And seeing how they pushed back against authority figures was jarring for myself. I'm sure for you too. But I think ultimately the why is what I reflected on later on in my life. I think I too at that point was just very confused with Harry Potter. I didn't really understand the direction. I didn't understand the maturity, but the maturity also felt like it was whining kids trying to be mature. If I'm being completely honest. But I think later on the why became important, because overall you had to see the big picture of how devastating it would be for Voldemort to come back to power. And whatever trials and tribulations and adult figures you had to push back against is the learning process for all of these kids. Because ultimately they are still kids. I think they're 15 or 16 in these two movies, in the stories at least. And just imagining myself at 16, and, you know, being told what to do and kind of saying, okay, fine, I'll just do it because I think it's easier. But not really having that true sense of fear and true needing to push back against something that could potentially be evil. I do want to kind of highlight one really, you know, uplifting moment in this chapter, and it's the outsiders, the misfits section. It made me feel very at peace kind of with the world, because ultimately I think kids who, speaking in very general terms, kids who flock to stories like this, to fantasy and books, are a little weird, a little different. You know, we are kind of we're introverts. You know, we do separate ourselves from the norms of what it's been told to us in regular society. And I think, you know, it's one of those where you do feel included. Do you feel like you have a place in this world? You know, having seen stories like this and accepting the weirdness of magic and everything like that. What did you feel about kind of that explanation by Luna Lovegood, Ivana Lynch. Her being essentially her character as well, being very spacey, but also having a lot of truth to what she was trying to say about it's okay to kind of be who you are because you will find a place in this world if you kind of just follow your own path.
I actually really remember that part from the special. Ivana, the actress who played Luna Lovegood, I think her quote was, "The film gave her permission for people to accept parts of themselves," and she said it was quite liberating to see her oddness on screen. Her character really stood out to me. Prior to that, Hermione was the character that I aspired to be, someone who's like intelligent and confidently voices her opinion. But Luna was also a character that stood out to me, and I was inspired to be like her because I think at that time in my life, as a teenager, preteen, whatever age I was, I wanted to fit in. I desperately wanted to fit in. I did not want to go against the status quo. And to see this in film, this character who was just so her, and she had no care of what other people thought of her, that was so inspiring. And I also want to say that I think they cut to the other actors and actresses like Rupert as well as Emma talking about how they felt like they were misfits as well. It was reassuring that other people felt that way at some point. Like these huge celebrities felt the same way that I did at some point in my life. And I think as I got older, I feel the same way that they are right now. I made peace with it, but it took a really long time. And when I saw Luna Lovegood, she's so young and she was already there. It was inspirational, and honestly, I was envious.
That's beautiful. And I'm glad you brought that up because that was a very impactful moment for me in the special, but also very reflective of growing up as a kid in the 90s who just wanted to watch cartoons and watch anime and read comic books and watch Star Wars and not necessarily understanding your place in the world. And then trying to connect with people, only for a lot of those people to say, "Oh, that's too nerdy. That's kid stuff." I think today it's far more accepted and celebrated. And I hate to sound like a grouchy old man, but you didn't know back then when you couldn't just turn on the internet and watch whatever you wanted and just be happy. You really had to go out of your way to experience your own imagination. And I think with this special, I think what it's highlighting is that we all find a family in our own way. And I think Harry Potter has done that for so many people. And I think the Outsiders section is very beautifully pieced together in that sense. It's kind of an awkward shift, but I think it does somewhat parallel with this idea of a grand scheme of things, a grand scale. It's the end of this chapter, and it's death. We did touch on it a little bit earlier. There are a few quotes that I want to bring up that was said, Dumbledore quotes. I'll say them, and I'll let you kind of respond to it. So one of them is, "Do not pity the dead, Harry. Pity the living. Pity the living, and above all, those who do not live with love." And the other one is, "It does not do to dwell on dreams, Harry, and forget to live." So how those quotes were used was to encapsulate kind of the end of the story for a lot of those characters, Dumbledore being one of them, but then also the end, the passing of real life people that have lived and grown with these stories and how they reflected on them. How did you take in all of those messages at this point in the special? And what did you think about the way they handled it?
So the first one, I think first of all, that segment was really emotional because a lot of the actors and actresses I liked, I was hoping that they would show up in the reunion special, but they just weren't there. So that was pretty emotional. In the 20 years, so much has changed. So that was really emotional. So for Dumbledore's quote, I think when I watched that, again, around that time was like fearful of death, but as I got older, I understood that quote more. Like the death part is not the end. And the living, I think it's sad for the living because we are still in the moment of figuring out our life and grieving for the dead. So I think that's how I interpreted the quote, and that's how I felt connected to it. But when I first saw it again, like when I was younger, it really didn't click with me. The second one, I think that one resonated with me more. Sorry, could you repeat that one about the dreams?
Yeah, no worries. It does not do to dwell on dreams, Harry,
Mm-hmm.
and forget to live.
Yeah, so I think for me, when I was younger, I like had a lot of fantasies, not just about like magical fantasies, but fantasies in my life. Like my happiness is I'm going to be happy when I get to A, B, or C point. Just normal goals that I had as I was nearing adulthood. And instead of like doing and taking action, I would just like fantasize on it. And I think it's important to do both as I get older. I think I ruminated a lot in the past also, like what I could have done better, and I dream and fantasize of what I could be doing better, and I'm sometimes stuck and living in the past, or sometimes I'm stuck and living on the future, but I'm not living in the present and doing what I need to do to make my future better, but also enjoying the present, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's kind of this idea of living for the checkpoints in life as
Yeah,
opposed to living to
exactly.
the path that you make for
Yeah.
yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, that was beautiful. Yeah, I think it all very much is in celebration and encapsulation of life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the way lives have affected everyone in the story, whether that's the main cast or their depictions of those characters to the rest of the world. You know,
Mm-hmm.
Dumbledore, Snape, Draco's mom, excellent
Yeah.
actress. She is in Peaky Blinders. She's supposed to be in there, but you know, we lost her recently. So shout out to them. Yeah, just a celebration of life. It's kind of how I kind of want to end that section.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's move on to chapter 4. Nearing the end, you know, we've got something worth fighting for. The Deathly Hallows Part 1 and Part 2. I think they did a nice job kind of ending the story here for the special. And they touched on the differences between the book and the movies, the books and the movies. How did you kind of receive all the information they were giving us? And what were some of the standout moments that were very clearly only done for the movies, but you know, played out a little bit differently, that kind of told a little bit more of the story?
I think the only part I remember was from the final battle. And I think they were talking about the scene where the director wanted a more earthy manifestation of the battle, where their soul, Voldemort and Harry's soul, was like intertwined. So they had the moment where they I can't think of the word, where they
Operate.
apparated
Yeah.
together. And there's
Nerd.
all these like, twists and turns, and that was not in the book. So I want to say that I was kind of worried at first because I knew it deviated a little bit from the books. Before I watched the movie, there was like articles, it's like different from the book. And I know a lot of series, like film series with sequels, when they have all this build up, and when they got to the final battle scene and the final scene of the series, it was like anticlimactic. It's all this build up. But I honestly felt that it met my expectations. I got really emotional at that last part, when it was coming to an end, and it was a good emotional experience because it really, really did meet my expectations of how I thought it would end. And again, I watched the movie first.
I love the way that they explained it, right?
Yeah.
Where in the books, it's going to play out differently because you have to give space to everyone in that setting. I think the battle
Yeah.
takes place at the Great Hall, everyone's watching.
Yeah.
In the movies, they really wanted to be a very personal experience, a separation of Voldemort and Harry Potter, a final battle. And I think it was beautiful how they visually explained the aberration being intertwined and then separating, and kind of the disintegration of Voldemort. For me, the scene that wasn't in the books that I always go back to, it's a scene that I noticed a few years ago that, you know, I immediately understood the purpose of it. And it's in the tent when it's just Harry and Hermione and they're dancing. And I understood at the time the issue with it because it's a very different movie. I talk about it in the special, but the purpose of that scene was to give yourself a moment of clarity. What happens? What would happen if we just said enough is enough? It's not our responsibility. Let's just walk away from it all and let the world fall as it may. And it's this moment of clarity between both characters that they're in peace with each other because they've always only had each other, right? But they know that they need to go back into the world. They need to essentially save the world, not just for each other, but because Ron's not there. So they need to find Ron. And it's this brilliant moment where, again, projecting myself into the movie, I can hope to see myself as this moment, as a hero, where you're put in this moment where do you just walk away? And I feel like that's a moment that a lot of people have at different points in their life, whether that's with school, with work, with responsibilities, with family, a myriad of experiences that mirror that type of question, but all done so beautifully within the context of Harry Potter. And I think that's the one that really hits me even till this day. Ooh. Yeah, just thinking about it, it's very emotional. And again, I think ultimately it ends on this very epic ending, this finality of the story, and kind of moving on from Harry Potter, but also allowing the stories to live on within each of the characters. Moving on to closing thoughts now with you, Lenira. So, we went through this entire amazing special, going back, reflecting on the characters, the stories, and also our personal connections with everything. What is a lesson that you would like to give to the next generation of fans, whether that's fantasy, science fiction, books, comic books, Star Wars, anything? And there's like anyone, we're searching for our place in the world. What's your advice to them, your message to them in search of that point of inspiration?
So I think there's just like so many themes and lessons to be learned from the series, but something that resonated with me time and time again and at every different point in my life, especially as I was growing up in parallel characters and the film series, is don't underestimate the power of choice. I think as we get older, there's like more constraints and responsibilities for us. And a lot of the times I feel like life is dictating what I can and cannot do. And I feel there are like times where I just feel completely out of control in my life. And in this movie, it helped remind me of the power of choices. A specific example is when Harry Potter at the very beginning, well, Malfoy offered to take him under his wing and he decided not to shake Malfoy's hand. It would be a very, very different story if he accepted that offer. And even in the same movie, the choice he made where he didn't want to be in Slytherin. If he was in Slytherin, he did not meet Ron and Hermione. Also, that would have changed the trajectory of the story. And also in the same movie is when he decided not to give into Voldemort's very enticing offer of letting him see his parents again. So I think a lesson for the next generation from this specific film is don't underestimate the power of choices.
That's beautiful. I'm always reminded by this idea of the butterfly effect and this cascade of outcomes, right? You don't know how one choice will affect your future, but you have to make it. You have to be the one in control of your own destiny. We always like to put destiny and self-determination in conflict with each other. When for me, the idea is destiny leads you to a point of choice. It's up to your own free will, your own agency to make that choice when it arrives. And I think the way that you brought that up was so beautifully intertwined with the story and how all these choices that Harry made throughout his life led him to the point at the end where he wanted to do everything on his own. He wanted to fight Voldemort on his own. But it's the accumulation of the love and the people around him that ultimately had them succeed and win. That good prevailed. And I think they talked about it too in the reunion special where Neville is the one talking about being the champion. And then Ron and Hermione being the ones supporting him throughout. But it's that accumulation of people because of all the choices that Harry made that led us to that point in the story. That's beautiful. Lenira. And to kind of end things, with a final thought, Harry Potter has been such an important part of yours and mine life, our lives. What are the hopes that you have for Harry Potter and the Wizarding world into the future?
So this part in the special made me the most emotional. And it's when Robbie, the actor who played Hagrid, said, "The legacy of the movies is that my children's generation will show them to their children so that you can be watching in 50 years' time easily. I'll not be here, sadly, but Hagrid will." And that made me so, so emotional. The series is so special to me, as you can hear and see from our conversation. I love the characters. I love this universe, and I really hope that the future generations can enjoy the magic and the series.
That's got me emotional now. Thanks. It is such a sentiment of legacy and this idea of generational tales, mythic storytelling that spans beyond time, right? And stories like this live on, even if the people are no longer around, but the lessons to be learned throughout the entire story, the journey, if you will, is something that I think everyone can experience and everyone can relate to at different points in their life, regardless of when they experience them, well into the future. Hopefully we actually have flying cars by then. But I think because the world is a fantastical world, it's a fairy tale. It's in parallel with our own real world, but it's a world of magic. And I think a lot of those lessons that we talked about today are things that can be carried out from generation to generation. And shout out to Hagrid for bringing that home for us. That one kind of hit me just now, so I really appreciate that you brought that one up, Lenira. All right, that was an exhale for our audio only listeners. We killed it. We went deep, emotional. That was like therapy. Lenira, thank you so much for joining and really going deep on Harry Potter, the reunion special, and everything that we love about this wizarding world. Any final thoughts?
No, this was such a great experience, Anton. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, dude, anytime. Like I said, you came to mind immediately when the special was announced, and I wanted to have you on to talk about it because, again, I think the fact that we met in our adult lives, we're able to connect and perpetuate this idea of misfits coming together was really important and meaningful for me, especially at that point in my life and even today. So thanks again for coming on.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, let's sign out. Thank you, everyone, for listening to the Nerdverse Adventures. Follow on Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts, and find the show on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok at the Nerdverse Adventures. This is Anton for Lenira, and this has been the Nerdverse Adventures